When the Vexari Dominion sent their ultimate bioengineered apex predator to hunt one lone human, they expected a quick, effortless kill. Instead, the hunter met something far more dangerous than prey. Outgunned and outmatched, Jack Harlan turned the crumbling city into his deadliest weapon, luring the monster into a derelict industrial hell where advanced technology failed and raw human desperation reigned. In a brutal, bone-shattering final showdown, the human refused to break and sent the predator back in pieces with a chilling message. They sent their apex predator to hunt us. It never came back. Before we dive deeper into the story, please subscribe. It costs you nothing, but helps Stellar HFY a lot. In the obsidian halls of the Unyielding Fang, flagship of the Vexari Dominion, High Hunter Voreth paced before a holographic display of the blue-green world below. The planet's continents glowed with scattered lights, primitive cities clinging to the surface like mold on rotting fruit. Humanity. They had repelled 3 scout incursions already, not with fleets or advanced weapons, but with sheer, stubborn defiance. Ships lost, warriors gone silent. Voreth's mandibles clicked with growing fury. "Enough," he snarled to the assembled council of armored lords. Their chitinous plates gleamed under crimson emergency lighting. "This species is a pest. We send Krager." A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. Krager. The name alone commanded silence. From the shadows of the deployment bay stepped the Dominion's apex predator. 8 feet of engineered death. Obsidian-black scales layered over hyperdense muscle, each plate etched with battle runes from 100 conquered worlds. Sensory nodes pulsed faintly across his carapace, capable of detecting a whisper of breath through 3 feet of reinforced concrete. His eyes, 4 cold vertical slits, glowed with predatory intelligence. A plasma lance fused seamlessly to his right forearm could vaporize a tank in seconds. Claws capable of rending starship hulls flexed idly at his sides. No armor, no need. Krager was the weapon. He stood motionless as technicians made final neural calibrations. His mind had been forged in the blood pits of the Dominion's harshest death worlds, conditioned for one imperative: the hunt. Failure was not a concept his genetics recognized. He had ended rebellions single-handedly. He had slain the Sky Krakens of Vexar Prime. A lone primitive on a backwater planet should be trivial. Voreth approached, his own armored form dwarfed by the hunter. The target is one male, Jack Harlan, ex-military scavenger in the ruins of their city called Detroit. Eliminate him. Send a message that resistance is suicide. Krager's voice rumbled like grinding tectonic plates. Understood. The contract will be fulfilled. The drop pod sealed around him with a hiss of pressurized atmosphere. Moments later, it tore away from the Unyielding Fang and screamed into the planet's atmosphere. Fire engulfed the pod's outer shell as it plummeted like a vengeful meteor. On the surface, in the skeletal remains of Detroit's old industrial corridor, Jack Harlan wiped sweat from his brow. The night air was thick with the smell of rust, oil, and distant decay. He was welding a fresh steel plate over the entrance of his bunker, an old fortified warehouse he'd claimed years ago. Sparks flew from the torch in his gloved hands, illuminating the hard lines of his face. 34 years old, scarred, lean with the kind of muscle that came from constant survival rather than gyms. His short beard was streaked with grease. A battered M4 rifle rested against a nearby crate within easy reach. The ground suddenly trembled. A deep, thunderous boom rolled across the ruins, followed by the unmistakable roar of something massive impacting a few miles away. Jack killed the torch instantly. His heart rate spiked. "Not again," he muttered. He'd seen strange lights in the sky before. Government black ops, corporate experiments, whatever it was, trouble always followed. He grabbed the rifle, slung a bandolier of scavenged ammo over his shoulder, and melted into the shadows. Years in the sandbox had taught him one truth. When the sky falls, you don't stand around asking questions. You move. Krager emerged from the crater in a cloud of dust and scorched earth. His cloaking field shimmered to life, bending light around his massive frame until he was little more than a heat haze. The air reeked of human pollution and fear. His sensory nodes flared, locking onto a faint heat signature 2 kilometers away. Jack Harlan, The hunt had begun. He moved like liquid shadow through the rubble-strewn streets. Overgrown lots and collapsed factories provided perfect cover, yet Krager navigated them with terrifying ease. His claws left deep gouges in concrete as he climbed over obstacles. A faint growl escaped his throat, eager, almost playful. This would be quick. Jack's boots barely made a sound as he sprinted through a narrow alley between two derelict warehouses. Something was wrong. The usual night sounds, distant traffic, stray dogs, wind through broken windows, had gone deathly silent. The air felt heavier, oppressive. He could feel eyes on him, predator eyes. He ducked behind a rusted forklift and listened. Nothing. Then, a faint scrape of claw on metal far too close. Jack's blood ran cold. He risked a glance around the corner and froze. There, 20 yards away, the cloaking field flickered for a split second. The creature was enormous, alien, built like a nightmare crossed with a tank. Its eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence as it scanned the area. Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. "What the hell are you?" He didn't wait for an answer. Jack raised the rifle and fired 3 rapid shots. The reports cracked like thunder in the quiet night. Sparks exploded off the creature's chest plates. It didn't even flinch. Krager's head snapped toward him. A low, bone-chilling laugh echoed across the lot, distorted, mechanical, yet dripping with amusement. Primitive weapons, how quaint. The hunter exploded forward with impossible speed. Jack barely had time to roll aside as claws the size of combat knives shredded the forklift behind him like paper. Metal screeched. He came up running, heart slamming against his ribs, legs pumping desperately through the maze of ruins. The chase was on. Jack used every trick he knew. He doubled back through a collapsed parking structure, kicking over barrels of old oil to create slick patches. He smashed emergency lights as he passed, plunging sections of the street into deeper darkness. Behind him, Krager pursued with relentless patience, closing the distance in terrifying bursts. A claw slashed across Jack's left shoulder as he dove through a shattered window. Pain erupted like fire. Blood soaked his jacket instantly. He gritted his teeth and kept moving, firing blindly over his shoulder. One round actually struck a sensory node on the alien's neck, eliciting a hiss of irritation. "You bleed," Krager growled, voice carrying unnaturally through the night. "Good, the fear makes the hunt sweeter." Jack's mind raced. This thing was faster, stronger, and seemingly bulletproof. Outrunning it wasn't an option. He needed to survive long enough to think. He sprinted deeper into the urban decay, lungs burning, shoulders screaming with every stride. The city's concrete jungle became his only hope, narrow alleys where the creature's bulk would slow it, rooftops, storm drains. Another near miss. Krager's plasma lance discharged, turning a brick wall into molten slag inches from Jack's head. The heat scorched his face. He stumbled into an old machine shop and barricaded the door with a heavy workbench, buying himself seconds. Panting in the darkness, Jack pressed his back against a rusted lathe, trying to stem the bleeding with a torn strip of his shirt. Outside, he could hear the creature systematically tearing through the barricade. Slow, deliberate, enjoying the terror. Jack Harlan had faced death before, in war, in the ruins of civilization. But this was different. This was something sent specifically for him, something that should not exist. And yet, deep in his gut, beneath the fear and pain, something primal stirred. A cold, defiant rage. "You want to hunt, you bastard," he thought, teeth clenched. "Then let's dance." By the time the first hints of dawn touched the shattered skyline, Krager had wounded the human multiple times. Yet Jack still lived, still fled, still resisted. High above, Voreth watched the ocular feed with growing displeasure. The apex predator's first hunt on this world was already proving far more interesting than anticipated. The contract had been signed in blood, and the real nightmare was only beginning. Jack Harlan's boots pounded against cracked asphalt, each step sending fresh jolts of agony through his torn shoulder. Blood seeped steadily from the gash, soaking his jacket and leaving a faint crimson trail that any competent hunter could follow. The city ruins stretched around him like the bones of a long-dead giant, twisted rebar, hollowed-out buildings, and streets choked with the wreckage of forgotten lives. Dawn was breaking, but the light brought no comfort. It only made the shadows sharper. Behind him, death moved without haste. Krager's massive form glided through the debris, his cloaking field flickering in and out as damaged nodes struggled to compensate. The human's blood smelled sharp and metallic on the wind, fear mixed with defiance. The Vexari hunter's lips peeled back in a predator's grin. This was no longer a simple extermination. The prey had drawn first blood, however minor. Respect warred with irritation in Krager's engineered mind. Jack ducked into a narrow alley between two crumbling warehouses, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could hear it, the low, rhythmic thud of the alien's footsteps like a heartbeat from hell. No panic, no rushing, just inevitable. Not today, Jack thought. He snatched a rusted metal pipe from the ground and smashed a cluster of old sodium vapor streetlights as he passed. Glass shattered. The alley plunged into deeper gloom. He dropped a handful of caltrops, twisted rebar spikes he'd scavenged months ago, behind him and kept running. The first trap worked. A thunderous roar split the air as Krager stepped on the spikes. One pierced the softer joint between scale plates on his foot. Not lethal, but enough to draw a snarl of pure rage. "Clever ape," the hunter hissed, voice carrying unnaturally through the ruins via his vocal implant. "You only delay the inevitable." Jack didn't reply. He was already climbing a fire escape on the side of an abandoned apartment block, muscles screaming. His left arm hung nearly useless, but adrenaline kept him moving. From the rooftop, he looked back. Krager was ripping the fire escape apart below him, metal screeching in protest. The creature's plasma lance hummed to life, carving a glowing arc through the building's support beams. The structure groaned. Jack sprinted across the rooftop, leaping to the next building as the one behind him began to collapse in a cascade of brick and dust. The shockwave nearly knocked him off balance. He rolled, came up firing. 3 shots. One found a damaged sensory node on Krager's neck, sparking violently. The alien staggered for half a second, long enough for Jack to drop into a storm drain. Darkness swallowed him. The tunnel was cramped, wet, and stinking of sewage and rot. Perfect for a human, terrible for something Krager's size. Jack splashed forward, hand trailing along the slimy wall to guide him. Behind, he heard concrete cracking as the hunter forced his way in. The drain opened into an old subway maintenance tunnel. Jack's flashlight beam danced across rusted rails and graffiti-covered walls. He had explored these tunnels years ago, mapping them as escape routes. Now they might save his life, or become his tomb. He stopped at a junction, hands shaking as he rigged a hasty trap with the last of his C4. A small block, wired to a motion sensor, scavenged from an old security system. He smeared some of his own blood on the opposite wall as a lure and kept moving. Minutes later, the explosion rocked the tunnel. Dust and debris filled the air. Jack allowed himself a savage grin in the darkness. "Got you, you son of a bitch." The grin died when a clawed hand punched through a collapsed section of ceiling and seized his ankle. Krager dragged him backward with terrifying strength. Jack slammed into the wall, ribs cracking audibly. Pain exploded across his torso. The alien hauled him into the main tunnel, slamming him down like a rag doll. Up close, Krager was even more nightmarish. Obsidian scales glistened with dust and blood, some his own. One eye cluster flickered erratically from the earlier shot. "You fight well," the hunter rumbled, voice laced with dark amusement. "For a moment, I almost believed you could escape." Jack drove his boot into the creature's injured knee joint. Krager roared and backhanded him across the platform. The human flew 10 feet, crashing through a rusted turnstile. Stars burst behind his eyes. Blood filled his mouth. He crawled desperately into a side maintenance shaft, too narrow for the alien to follow easily. Krager tore the entrance wider, but the delay bought Jack time. He emerged 2 blocks away in an overgrown rail yard, lungs burning, vision blurring at the edges. Fever was setting in. The shoulder wound was definitely infected. The city became his weapon now. He led Krager through a series of choke points, narrow alleys where the hunter's bulk slowed him, collapsed overpasses that Jack triggered with precise rifle shots, sending tons of concrete crashing down. One avalanche buried Krager for nearly a minute. When the alien erupted from the rubble, shaking off dust and bent rebar like it was nothing, Jack was already gone. In a derelict parking garage, Jack used the environment with brutal creativity. He had spent weeks earlier rigging a counterweight system with chains and old car engines for defense. Now he activated it. As Krager charged up the ramp, Jack released the lever. An entire floor of rusted vehicles, dozens of them, cascaded down in a metallic avalanche. The noise was deafening. The weight slammed into the hunter, crushing him against a support pillar. For several heart-stopping seconds, silence reigned except for settling metal. Jack leaned against a pillar, gasping, trying to staunch the bleeding from new cuts. Then the pile of cars shifted. A clawed hand punched upward. Krager rose like some vengeful demon from the scrap, dented, furious, but alive. His plasma lance discharged wildly, melting a path through the wreckage. Jack fled again, limping now, every breath a knife between his ribs. The chase stretched through the morning hours of cat-and-mouse across the concrete jungle. He used fire escapes as improvised zip lines, smashed windows to create glittering fields of glass that cut the hunter's feet, even released a pack of feral dogs from an old warehouse. The animals attacked on instinct. Krager slaughtered them in seconds, but the distraction allowed Jack to vanish into the subway system once more. High above in orbit, Vorath watched the live feed from Krager's implants with mounting frustration. This is taking too long. The apex predator toys with vermin. But Krager was no longer toying. The human's resilience was forcing him to adapt. The hunter's self-repair systems worked overtime, knitting damaged scales and sealing internal micro-tears. Yet the constant pursuit was draining even his immense stamina. As night fell again, Jack holed up in the ruins of an old public library. Books lay scattered like fallen soldiers. He barricaded the doors, then collapsed against a shelf, using the dim light of a chemical glow stick to stitch his worst wounds with a scavenged sewing kit. His hands trembled violently. Infection burned through him. He was breaking. Yet in the quiet, his mind sharpened. He couldn't outrun this thing forever. Strength and speed were lost causes. He needed to change the battlefield entirely. Outside, Krager stood motionless in the pouring rain, scanning the area. His damaged sensors painted the human's heat signature inside the building. He could end it now, tear through the walls and finish the contract. But something held him back, a rare flicker of curiosity. This prey was worthy of a proper hunt, one that would echo through the Dominion's halls. Jack Harlan pressed a fresh bandage to his side and stared into the darkness. The rain hammered the roof like distant artillery. He whispered to himself, voice hoarse but steady. "You want me? Fine, I'll pick the ground. And when we fight there, only one of us walks out." The shadows in the concrete jungle had bought him time, but the real war was coming. Sea-clay green shadows across scattered books and toppled shelves. Rain hammered the roof like machine gun fire. Every breath sent sharp stabs through his cracked ribs. The crude stitches on his shoulder and side pulled tight, threatening to tear open again. Blood had soaked through the bandages, mixing with sweat and rain that dripped from his hair. Fever burned behind his eyes, turning the world into a hazy, throbbing nightmare. He couldn't stay here. The creature, Krager, would tear this place apart the moment it decided to stop playing. Jack forced himself to his feet, using a fallen bookshelf for support. His legs trembled. Keep moving, always moving. That had been his mantra since the war, since the world started falling apart piece by piece. But this wasn't some enemy patrol or raider gang. This was something engineered to be perfect death. Outside, Krager stood motionless in the downpour, a silhouette of pure menace against the flickering streetlights. His cloaking field stuttered intermittently now. Damaged nodes unable to fully compensate for the cumulative damage. One eye cluster still sparked from Jack's lucky shot earlier. The hunter's self-repair systems hummed beneath his scales, knitting tissue and purging toxins, but the hunt was taking its toll. For the first time in his existence, Krager felt the edges of something unfamiliar, impatience bordering on respect. "The prey weakens," Krager rumbled to himself, vocal implant translating the thought into a low growl. Yet he persists. Jack knew he was being watched. He could feel it in his bones. Instead of hiding completely, he began leaving a trail. Deliberate, provocative, a spent rifle casing here, a bloody handprint on a wall there, scratched into a rusted door with his knife. "Come get me, you oversized lizard." He wanted Kragger angry. Angry predators made mistakes, predictable ones. He slipped out through a shattered rear window, vanishing into the storm-lashed streets. The rain helped mask his scent, but not enough. Within minutes, the chase resumed. Kragger exploded into motion, smashing through the library's front doors in a shower of glass and splintered wood. Books turned to pulp under his claws as he followed the fresh blood trail. Jack was already 3 blocks ahead, limping through an overgrown park where trees had reclaimed the sidewalks. His vision swam. Hallucinations flickered at the edges, ghosts of fallen comrades from Iraq whispering warnings. A plasma bolt seared past him, vaporizing a park bench into molten slag. The heat washed over Jack's back, singeing his jacket. He dove behind a concrete fountain, heart slamming against his broken ribs. Too close. He returned fire blindly, the M4's recoil jarring his wounded shoulder. One bullet pinged off Kragger's chest plate. Another struck a leg joint, drawing a roar that shook the leaves from nearby trees. "You dare injure me further, ape?" Kragger's voice boomed through the rain, laced with genuine fury now. The hunter charged, claws tearing up earth and concrete. Jack rolled away at the last second, the creature's swipe missing him by inches and gouging a deep trench in the ground. The pursuit turned into a brutal symphony of cat and mouse across the decaying city. Jack used the urban decay like a seasoned guerrilla fighter. He led Kragger into a narrow underpass beneath an old highway, where the alien's bulk forced him to slow. Jack had pre-rigged the area weeks ago for defense, old propane tanks wired to a tripwire. As Kragger closed in, Jack triggered it. The explosion lit up the tunnel in orange hellfire. The blast wave slammed the hunter against the wall, cracking several scales and embedding shrapnel in his side. Jack didn't wait to admire his work. He scrambled up a service ladder to the highway above, legs burning, blood streaming from reopened wounds. Sirens wailed in the distant city proper, probably automated responses to the explosions, but no help would come, not for a scavenger like him. Kragger emerged from the flames, smoke curling from his carapace. His plasma lance hummed angrily as he leaped upward in a single bound, landing on the highway with enough force to crack the asphalt. The chase intensified. Jack sprinted across the elevated road, abandoned cars providing meager cover. Kragger smashed through them like toys, sending vehicles tumbling into the darkness below. In a moment of desperate inspiration, Jack slid under a semi-trailer, using its undercarriage to hide while Kragger tore apart the cab. The hunter's frustration grew audible, growls turning to thunderous roars. Jack slipped away again, dropping down into a rail yard filled with derelict train cars. Here, the environment favored the human. Narrow gaps between cars, unstable stacks of containers. Jack climbed, leaped, and crawled through the maze, turning it into a deadly playground. Kragger followed, ripping entire boxcars off their tracks in his rage. One close call saw the alien's claw rake across Jack's thigh, opening a new gash that bled profusely. Jack screamed but kept moving, tying a tourniquet on the run with his belt. Hours blurred into a haze of pain and adrenaline. Jack's mind wandered to darker places as he hid inside a rusted tanker car, catching his breath. Memories of his wife and daughter, lost in the early chaos years ago. The promise he'd made to survive, to keep fighting no matter what. They took everything else. Not today, not to this thing. Kragger's voice echoed across the yard, amplified and taunting. "I can smell your despair, Harlan, your wounds, your fear. Submit, and the pain ends quickly." Jack bit back a bitter laugh. "Submit," he whispered to himself. "I've never been good at that." He emerged from hiding and deliberately fired a flare into the sky stolen from an old emergency kit, lighting up the night and drawing the hunter's full attention. Then he ran north, toward the industrial wasteland he had mapped in his mind for months. The old steel foundry complex. The power plant ruins. Places where advanced sensors choked on electromagnetic interference and chemical ghosts. A battlefield where technology bowed to raw, brutal physics. Krager pursued relentlessly. In a flooded basement beneath an old factory, they clashed again. Jack used a forklift he'd hot-wired earlier as an improvised battering ram, slamming it into the alien at full speed. The impact dented Krager's chest plates and sent him crashing through a wall. The hunter retaliated with terrifying speed, grabbing Jack by the throat and lifting him off the ground. Their faces were inches apart. Krager's vertical slit eyes bored into Jack's defiant gaze. "Why do you continue? You cannot win." Jack drove a knee into the damaged joint on the hunter's side, then jammed the barrel of his pistol into a soft gap beneath the jaw and fired twice. Krager roared in pain, dropping him. Jack landed hard, gasping, and fled once more, leaving the alien momentarily stunned. High above in orbit, aboard the unyielding Fang, High Hunter Vorath watched the feed with growing displeasure. The apex predator is being humiliated by a single primitive. End this farce, Krager. But Krager was silent on the comms. The hunt had become personal. The prey had earned a warrior's death. Jack reached the outskirts of the derelict industrial ruin as false dawn touched the horizon. The massive complex loomed like a metal graveyard, towering blast furnaces, tangled catwalks, silent chemical vats, and miles of piping. Electromagnetic hum from old generators, still faintly active, played havoc with his pursuer's sensors. Perfect. He spent his last reserves of strength setting the stage. Tripwires, swinging I-beams rigged with chains, pressure plates under weakened gantries, a central crucible chamber where he would make his final stand. Here, in the guts of forgotten human industry, the alien's advantages would be blunted. Exhausted, bleeding, feverish, Jack collapsed against a rusted control panel. His voice was a hoarse whisper in the darkness. "Come on then, Krager. This is where the hunt ends, one way or another." The whispers of the wind through broken windows sounded almost like approval. The wounds had weakened him, but they had also forged his resolve into something unbreakable. The stage was set. And the apex predator was coming. Jack Harlan dragged himself deeper into the heart of the derelict industrial ruin, each step a battle against the fire consuming his body. The old steel foundry and power complex sprawled across 50 acres like the skeleton of some ancient beast. Towering blast furnaces frozen mid-melt, catwalks twisted by decades of neglect, and a labyrinth of pipes and vats that still hummed with residual electromagnetic interference. Chemical residue from long-abandoned processes fouled the air, making it thick and metallic, perfect for what he had planned. His hands shook violently as he worked. Blood dripped from reopened wounds onto the rusted floor. The fever had turned his skin clammy and hot, but his mind remained razor-sharp, fueled by pure defiance. He had mapped this place over months of scavenging runs. Now it would become his arena. He rigged tripwires connected to massive overhead cranes, their chains heavy with counterweights scavenged from fallen gantries. Pressure plates fashioned from old boiler plates sat beneath unstable sections of catwalk. In narrow corridors, he balanced I-beams to swing like pendulums of death at the slightest disturbance. Every trap was crude, mechanical, born of desperation and human ingenuity. No electronics that Krager's advanced sensors could easily spoof. In the central crucible chamber, a vast, echoing space where molten steel once flowed, Jack prepared the final stage. He cleared a rough circle near the old control pulpit, positioning heavy chains and levers within reach. A jagged shard of reinforced glass from a shattered observation window lay ready, its edge honed against concrete. This would not be a fight of strength. It would be one of will and environment. Exhaustion clawed at him as he finished. He slumped against a rusted pillar, gasping. "Come on, you bastard," he whispered into the darkness. "This is my ground now." Krager approached from the south, his massive form silhouetted against the rising sun. The hunter's cloaking field fizzled and died completely within the complex's interference zone. His scales were dented and cracked in multiple places. One leg favored slightly from accumulated damage, yet his presence remained terrifying. 4 vertical eyes scanned the ruins, picking up the deliberate trail of blood and taunting messages Jack had left behind. "The prey has chosen his grave," Krager rumbled, voice echoing off the metal structures. He could smell the human, Weakness, blood, sweat, infection. Victory was close. But the shift in terrain unsettled even his conditioned instincts. Advanced sensors struggled here. Electromagnetic ghosts and chemical fog blinded long-range scans. Fine, he would hunt the old way. Jack's voice suddenly boomed through the complex, amplified by a jury-rigged speaker system he'd wired to an old emergency generator. You were sent to hunt us, but you never understood what we are, Krager. Predators like you need perfect conditions. Humans, we turn shit into weapons. Krager snarled and charged into the ruins. The first trap sprang almost immediately. A tripwire snapped. A massive I-beam swung from the shadows like a wrecking ball. It slammed into the hunter's side with bone-jarring force, cracking scales, and sending him staggering into a wall. The impact reverberated through the foundry like thunder. Jack watched from a high catwalk, rifle raised. He fired. The shots pinged off armor, but one struck the damaged sensory cluster near Krager's neck. The alien roared in fury and unleashed his plasma lance. Blue-white fire carved through the catwalk supports. Jack leaped just as the section collapsed, landing hard on a lower platform 2 stories down. Pain exploded through his broken ribs. He bit back a scream and kept moving. The chase inside the arena became a deadly, heart-pounding dance. Krager smashed through obstacles with raw power, but the tight corridors and hanging machinery slowed his lethal speed. Jack used every inch of the terrain, sliding down chutes, swinging across gaps on chains, vanishing into clouds of steam from ruptured pipes. Each narrow escape stretched the tension to breaking point. Krager lunged around a corner, claws extended. Jack barely ducked beneath a sweeping arm, feeling the wind of death brush his scalp. He rolled and triggered a pressure plate. A section of overhead piping burst, spraying superheated steam directly into the hunter's face. Krager bellowed, scales hissing as the steam scalded exposed joints. Jack didn't hesitate. He drove a rebar spike into the alien's thigh with all his remaining strength before fleeing deeper. You fight like vermin, Krager roared, ripping the spike free. Cowardly tricks. Cowardly, Jack shouted back, voice echoing from multiple directions thanks to the acoustics. This is what survival looks like when you're outmatched, asshole. High above in orbit, aboard the unyielding Fang, High Hunter Voreth slammed a clawed fist onto the command console. The live feed showed Krager, the Dominion's invincible apex, being led in circles by a bleeding, broken human. This is unacceptable. The prey mocks us. Krager ignored the transmission. The hunt consumed him now. Respect for the human had twisted into something darker, obsession. He would not simply kill Jack Harlan, he would break him first. Jack led him toward the central crucible chamber, leaving a trail of blood that glowed faintly under Krager's remaining sensors. His body was failing, vision tunneling, legs numb, but his will burned hotter than the old furnaces ever had. He could hear the hunter closing in, metal groaning under its weight. In a narrow maintenance tunnel, Krager caught up. He seized Jack by the ankle and slammed him against the wall. The impact drove the air from his lungs. Claws raked across his chest, opening fresh gashes. Blood sprayed. Jack screamed but twisted violently, jamming his pistol into the soft underjaw and firing until the slide locked back empty. Krager recoiled with a piercing shriek, dropping him. Jack crawled, then ran, bursting into the vast central chamber. Moonlight filtered through shattered skylights high above, illuminating the rusted machinery like a cathedral of decay. This was it, the arena. Krager followed moments later, limping, smoke rising from multiple wounds. His plasma lance flickered unsteadily in the interference. No more running, Harlan, face me. Jack stood in the center of the crucible floor, swaying but defiant. Blood streamed down his face from a scalp wound. His eyes burned with cold fury. You were sent to hunt a human. Welcome to hell. The alien charged. Jack triggered the final preparations. Cranes groaned to life on emergency power. Chains rattled. The environment itself awakened as a weapon. A swinging counterweight the size of a truck smashed into Krager mid-stride, knocking him sideways. Jack moved like a ghost despite his injuries, using the machinery for cover, luring the hunter onto weakened platforms. Every clash was brutal and intimate. Krager's fist cratered the floor where Jack had stood. Jack retaliated with a heavy chain whip to the face, drawing black ichor. The tension built unbearably, each second a razor's edge between life and death. Close calls multiplied. Plasma fire missing by centimeters, claws tearing cloth and flesh, near falls into the deep crucible pit below. Krager grew more savage, sensing the end. He cornered Jack against the old control pulpit, delivering a savage beating. Fists like pistons cracked ribs. A backhand sent Jack sprawling, vision exploding with stars. The hunter loomed over him, plasma lance charging for the kill. Yet Jack endured, laughing through bloodied teeth. "That all you got?" The words enraged Krager further. He lifted the human high, preparing the final blow. In that suspended, heart-stopping moment, Jack's blood-slick hand closed around the jagged glass shard hidden beneath the pulpit. The true battle for survival had only just begun. Krager's massive hand closed around Jack Harlan's throat like a steel vice, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. The human's boots dangled above the rusted floor of the central crucible chamber. Moonlight streamed through the shattered skylights above, casting jagged shadows across the arena of forgotten industry. Jack's vision blurred at the edges, his broken ribs grinding with every shallow, desperate gasp. Blood trickled from his mouth, warm and metallic. "You have fought well, ape," Krager rumbled, his voice a guttural vibration that shook the air. 4 vertical eyes burned with predatory triumph and something darker, frustration forged into rage. "But the hunt ends here. Your species will learn what it means to defy the Vexari dominion." Jack's hands clawed uselessly at the alien's wrist. His lungs screamed for air. The world narrowed to the throbbing pulse in his temples and the cold, calculating gaze of the monster holding him. In that suspended heartbeat, memories flashed. His wife's laugh, his daughter's tiny hand in his, the promise he'd made over their graves to never stop fighting. "Not like this. Not to you." With a savage twist, Jack drove the jagged shard of reinforced glass, hidden in his palm, deep into the soft, vulnerable joint beneath Krager's jaw. The apex predator roared in agony. Black ichor sprayed across Jack's face as the shard sliced through neural clusters and muscle. Krager's grip loosened involuntarily. Jack dropped like a stone, hitting the floor hard enough to crack another rib. Pain detonated through his body, but he rolled immediately, gasping, crawling toward the control pulpit. Krager staggered back, clawing at the protruding glass. "You insect!" He ripped the shard free, hurling it aside with a wet crunch. The wound hissed, self-repair protocols flooding the area, but the damage was done. One eye cluster flickered erratically. The hunter's movements turned feral, all precision lost to primal fury. Jack slammed his fist onto the hidden lever beneath the pulpit. Ancient machinery, dormant for decades, groaned to life. Emergency generators, scavenged and coaxed back from the dead, sputtered and surged. Overhead cranes screeched as chains rattled into motion. Ruptured pipes exploded with superheated steam, flooding the chamber in swirling white clouds. The environment itself became a weapon, chaotic and unforgiving. The brutal symphony began. Krager charged through the steam like a demon from hell, plasma lance blazing erratically in the electromagnetic interference. Jack barely dodged the first swipe, the claws gouging deep furrows into the control panel behind him. Sparks flew. He swung onto a dangling chain, using his momentum to arc across the chamber. Krager followed, leaping with terrifying power, shattering a catwalk section in his wake. The tension stretched to breaking. Jack landed hard on a lower gantry, legs buckling. Krager was there instantly, delivering a piston-like punch to his midsection. Jack flew backward, slamming into a rusted pillar. The impact drove the air from his lungs in a spray of blood. He slid down, coughing, visions swimming. Get up or die." He rolled aside as Krager's foot cratered the floor where his head had been. Jack grabbed a loose length of heavy chain and whipped it upward with desperate strength. The metal links cracked across the alien's face, splitting scales and drawing more ichor. Krager roared and backhanded him, sending Jack tumbling across the crucible floor. The beating intensified. Krager stalked him like a wounded tiger, each blow calculated to break body and spirit. A kick to the ribs lifted Jack off the ground again. Another fist smashed into his shoulder, reopening the gash from the first night. Blood slicked the floor, making every movement treacherous. Jack's world became pain and motion: crawl, dodge, counter, survive. Yet he endured. Through gritted teeth, he laughed, a broken, defiant sound that echoed off the walls. "You hit like a rookie in basic training." The taunt enraged Kragger further. The hunter grabbed Jack by the collar, slamming him repeatedly against a massive gear assembly. Metal groaned. Jack's head snapped back with each impact, blood streaming from his nose and ears. His left arm hung limp, useless. Vision tunneled to pinpricks. But in the haze, his right hand found a control switch. He flipped it. A massive overhead counterweight, rigged earlier, swung free on its chain. It slammed into Kragger's back with the force of a freight train. The alien staggered forward, dropping Jack. The impact dented his carapace deeply, cracking ribs beneath the scales. Kragger spun, plasma lance firing wildly. The blue-white beam carved a molten scar across the chamber wall, missing Jack by centimeters as he dove behind a fallen girder. Steam and smoke filled the air, turning the arena into a choking nightmare. Jack's heart hammered wildly. Every breath was fire. Infection and blood loss pulled him toward unconsciousness, but adrenaline and sheer will kept him conscious. He lured Kragger onto a weakened platform, dodging claws and plasma with inches to spare. The hunter's frustration boiled over. "Why won't you break?" he bellowed, voice distorted with pain. "Because we're human," Jack snarled back, voice raw. "We don't know how to quit." Kragger lunged again. Jack triggered another trap, a cascade of scrap metal from an overhead hopper. The avalanche buried the alien momentarily under tons of rusted steel and debris. For a few precious seconds, silence fell except for the hiss of steam and Jack's ragged breathing. He dragged himself toward the crucible pit's edge, where old mechanisms still held remnants of slag and chemical reservoirs. Kragger erupted from the pile with a thunderous roar, shedding metal like water. His body was a ruin of cracks and leaking ichor, yet he moved with undiminished lethality. He closed the distance in 3 bounding strides. Jack stood at the edge of the pit, swaying, a final length of rebar sharpened into a crude spear in his good hand. The two faced each other in the swirling chaos, man and monster, both battered beyond reason. The air crackled with tension. One final, desperate clash. Kragger charged. Jack met him head-on, driving the rebar spear into a damaged joint in the alien's side. Kragger howled and grabbed him in a crushing bear hug, squeezing the life from his broken body. Bones creaked. Jack felt something snap inside. Darkness crowded his vision. In that moment of crushing agony, Jack's hand found the last lever, a pneumatic piston system he'd rigged to the old furnace controls. With the last of his strength, he pulled it. The machinery screamed to life around them. The pneumatic piston system screamed to life with a deafening metallic howl. Ancient gears, long seized by rust, ground into sudden violent motion. Jack Harlan felt his ribs cracking under Kragger's crushing embrace, the alien's obsidian scales grinding against his broken body like living sandpaper. Black ichor and human blood mixed in a slick mess between them. Darkness clawed at the edges of Jack's vision. His lungs refused to expand. One more second and it would all end. But the lever had been pulled. A massive counterweighted piston, rigged from the old slag crane mechanism, slammed forward like the fist of a forgotten god. It caught Kragger squarely in the side with catastrophic force. The impact launched both of them across the crucible chamber. Kragger's grip shattered. Jack flew free, tumbling across the blood-slick floor, while the apex predator smashed into a bank of rusted machinery with bone-shattering violence. Kragger roared, an unnatural, agonized sound that echoed through the vast space. He tried to rise, plasma lance sparking erratically, but the damage was catastrophic. Cracked scales hung loose. Internal fluids leaked from multiple ruptures. One arm hung limp, shattered by the piston strike. Jack lay gasping on the ground, every breath a symphony of agony. He could feel the internal bleeding, the sharp grind of broken bones. His left arm was useless. Blood poured from his ears and nose. Yet he forced himself up on pure willpower, grabbing a jagged length of rebar that had been part of his final trap. The shard of reinforced glass from earlier still lay nearby, slick with alien ichor. "You will die screaming," Krager snarled, dragging himself forward. His voice glitched through the damaged vocal implant. Even now, wounded and broken, the hunter was terrifying. He lunged, claws extended for the killing strike. Jack met the charge head-on. He drove the rebar spear into the fresh wound beneath Krager's jaw, twisting viciously. The alien gurgled, swinging wildly. A backhand caught Jack across the face, splitting his cheek to the bone and sending him spinning. He crashed against the control pulpit, stars exploding behind his eyes. The chamber had become a maelstrom. Steam continued to vent from ruptured pipes. Overhead chains swung chaotically. The weakened platform beneath them groaned ominously. Jack triggered one last pressure plate with his boot as he rolled away. A cascade of heavy scrap metal and broken girders rained down from the rafters, partially burying Krager's legs and pinning him momentarily. This was the moment. Jack crawled desperately toward the edge of the deep crucible pit. Old chemical reservoirs and the remnants of the furnace system waited below, decades of hardened slag mixed with volatile residues. With his good arm, he wrenched open a final valve he had prepared. A torrent of corrosive chemicals mixed with residual molten material began to pour. Krager tore free from the debris with a primal scream. He charged one final time, faster than Jack expected. The hunter's claws raked across Jack's back as the human dove aside at the last instant. Jack hit the release on the rigged crane hook. A massive dangling girder swung like a pendulum and smashed into Krager's chest, driving him backward toward the pit's edge. The two combatants stood mere feet apart on the crumbling lip. Krager's 4 eyes locked onto Jack's defiant gaze. For a heartbeat, something almost like mutual respect passed between predator and prey. "You were never just meat," Krager rasped, "but the Dominion will send more." Jack smiled through bloodied, broken teeth. "Then they'll lose more." He lunged forward with the last of his strength, driving the glass shard deep into the alien's primary neural cluster, while simultaneously kicking out at the weakened platform edge. The structure gave way with a tortured screech of metal. Both of them plummeted into the crucible pit. Jack grabbed a dangling chain at the last second, his shoulder screaming in protest. Krager wasn't so lucky. The apex predator crashed into the machinery below, entangled in chains and collapsing girders. The chemicals and slag poured down in a deadly flood. Krager fought viciously to the end, plasma firing wildly, claws tearing metal, but the weight, the heat, and the crushing machinery proved too much. A final, earth-shaking roar echoed up from the pit as the improvised trap closed. Metal groaned and settled. Then, silence. Jack hung from the chain, barely conscious, blood dripping into the abyss below. Every part of him screamed for release, for the sweet darkness of unconsciousness. But he refused. Not yet. Hand over hand, he pulled himself up, muscles tearing, vision blacking out in waves. When he finally collapsed onto the edge of the platform, he crawled toward Krager's ruined head, which had been partially severed in the final collapse. The ocular implant still flickered faintly, transmitting a weak signal back to the unyielding fang. Jack dragged himself close, coughing blood. He stared directly into the dying lens. "You sent your apex predator to hunt a human," he rasped, voice raw but steady, carrying every ounce of defiance left in his broken body. "He never came back. The contract is void. Tell your masters if they come for us again, we'll be waiting, and next time we won't be alone." He slammed a piece of debris through the implant, crushing it in a shower of sparks. The transmission died. High above in orbit aboard the unyielding fang, High Hunter Vorath watched the final feed in stunned silence. The council chamber was deathly quiet. Krager, their invincible legend, destroyed by a single primitive scavenger, one human, in a ruined factory, using scrap and desperation. "Impossible," Vorath whispered. The holographic display flickered and went dark. On the surface, dawn broke over the industrial ruins. Golden light filtered through the shattered skylights, illuminating the carnage. Jack Harlan lay against a rusted pillar, barely alive. His body was a map of agony, broken bones, deep lacerations, internal bleeding. But he was breathing. He had won. He stared up at the sky through a hole in the roof, a faint, pained smile on his lips. The city, his city, stood silent witness around him. The concrete jungle and the metal graveyard had answered his call. Humanity hadn't won with superior technology or overwhelming force. They had won with grit, adaptability, and the refusal to die quietly. Far above, the unyielding Fang began to withdraw. The Vexari Dominion had received the message loud and clear. One hunter had been sent. One hunter had failed spectacularly. Jack closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the rising sun touch his face. He thought of his lost family, of all the survivors scraping by in the ruins, of the future. "They'll come again," he whispered to the empty air, "but we'll be ready." The apex predator had come to hunt humanity. It never came back. Subscribe.